this is Kai from KYL Equine Nutrition Consulting Business. And today I am at Miles Hay Farm with Daniel right here to talk about some hay knowledge for you guys.
I'm Daniel Miles of Miles Hay Farms. We have a farm here in the Christmas Valley, Silver Lake area. We call it North Lake County. And we've been raising hay on this farm for over 70 years, and our family has lived in this area since the 1880s.
So the purpose of this video is trying to bring the behind the scene hay producing into your hands, into the customer's eyes, so they can tell that what has been produced and how they produce it and how to choose a good quality hay. So I have some questions for you, Daniel. So what kind of hay type do you produce over here, and do you manage them differently?
Yes, so on our farm we grow alfalfa, alfalfa orchard mix, orchardgrass, teff, and Timothy alfalfa mix. And we base those on a rotation throughout the fields, and based on how old the field is, so how many years it's been growing, and then also what was grown in it previously. And we do manage these different crops differently as well. Alfalfa is a legume, while Timothy, orchard, and teff are grasses. And there's one really big difference between the legume, which is the alfalfa, and then the grasses. And that would be that the alfalfa produces its own nitrogen. And so from a fertilizer standpoint, we treat alfalfa very differently than the Timothy alfalfa, orchard alfalfa, or straight orchard or teff grass. Now, there's another important management factor with the fertilization between just the straight alfalfa and the straight teff or orchard grass. When we grow the two together, the alfalfa actually produces nitrogen for the alfalfa and also for the grasses. That's one of our largest considerations. Another consideration is when we harvest the crop, because alfalfa and the grasses, they grow at, they have different target heat ranges in which they grow. And so based upon the climatic conditions, either the alfalfa can grow more quickly or the grasses can grow more quickly. And that also is a little bit, there's a little bit of a difference there between the teff and the Timothy or the orchard grass, as teff is a warm season grass and orchard grass and Timothy are a cool season grass. So when we're trying to figure out when we want to harvest them, we have to look at the growth stage of the plant, and that's going to vary depending on what the growing conditions have been. Very slowly, and so there's a really high leaf to stem ratio. A lot of times in third cutting we'll see 70% leaf to 30% stem, and then those stems are going to be typically going to be small and still very palatable. Our first cutting we kind of consider our best cutting for us as farmers, because we're able to mix a pretty high yield with also a good nutritive quality to the hay. Our springs here are cool, and the nights often get down to around freezing or even below freezing, and so the plant grows very slowly, and it puts a lot more time into putting out leaves so it can conduct more photosynthesis, and that leaf is where you get a lot of your nutrition from your hay. And so the hay grows slowly over time, but also it reaches its maturity a lot later. It starts to go into its reproductive stage a lot later than, say, a second cutting would. And so the plant can get a lot larger without suffering the anti-quality factors of increased fiber and lower protein that we see a lot of times in our second cutting. Our second cutting typically is going to be what many would consider our lowest quality from a fiber digestibility standpoint and also a protein standpoint. That's because during the summer, after our first cutting, our second cutting hay, it grows much more quickly. The nights typically aren't as cold, and so that plant is able to reach its reproductive stage a lot more quickly, and so it doesn't put as much emphasis on leaf growth. It puts more emphasis into building the stalk, the stem, which is going to support the seed head, because the plant's goal is to reproduce and flower and create a seed. But the one good characteristic of our second cutting alfalfa is that typically it's lower in sugar than the rest, and that just has to do with, based primarily on the fact that the plant is spending a lot more time focusing on fiber as opposed to the leaf, and the leaves are where the sugar and the protein are at. So from a sugar standpoint, our second cutting usually has a low sugar, somewhere between 8 and 10%, while our first and our third cutting are going to be more in the 12 to 13% typically. Now, for grasses, we actually see things being a little different. Usually our second cutting is actually a higher, has more protein and a higher RFV than our first cutting. And that is because with grass, the grass during our first cutting, as it takes longer to grow, it actually ends up still putting resources into that fiber in the plant, and more stalk, because for grass to reach that sunlight, it actually needs to get taller. And so in order for grass, because it's usually finer stemmed, to reach that height, it has to put energy into fiber, into the stalk, so that then it can put leaves out higher. And so the first cutting, typically we're going to see a little bit lower RFE and a little lower protein, but we're also a lot of times are going to see lower sugar. Now that's only in our area, that's not the case everywhere. And then typically our second cutting, we're going to see it be a little bit higher in RFV. It's going to have a little nicer color also, and it's just going to generally look a little better and be a little higher quality feed, but the sugars generally are not going to be as low on our second cutting. But with the grasses, the quality has a lot more to do just with the timing of the cut in relation to the growth cycle of the plant. And that's one of the big differences between alfalfa and grass. With alfalfa, the life cycle of the plant is only a small portion of what actually affects the quality. A lot of it has to do with the climatic conditions, while the grass is a lot more based just on what part of its reproductive stage that it's at.
Yeah, thank you so much, Daniel. And I just wanted to point it out that a lot of people might have a myth, like, I just want to get my horse the second or the third cutting because they are the best. But just like Daniel said, a lot of times it depends on the climate condition, and the cutting of the time is actually more important than the cuts itself. And there are a lot of times that when we test hay, sometimes the first cut actually is more suitable to your horses. It depends on your horse's needs and depends on what kind of sugar level and protein level it's in the hay. So there's no just one rule fits all, that second or third cutting is always the best. So over here we have some beautiful alfalfa, but in Oregon we have a big concern, that is the rain, because Oregon does rain a lot. So Daniel, I have a question. How do you manage these kind of rainfall, and what happened if the hay got rained on out there? And do you concern about the mineral leaching from the rain?
Yes, so rain is basically the biggest concern of a hay farmer. We're always planning to try to do our harvesting around the forecast, and we want to make sure that the hay doesn't get rained on, but that doesn't always happen. So our typical process would be, we watch the weather, so we use NOAA, the National Oceanic in Atmospheric Association's forecast, which is pretty reliable. But unfortunately, it only goes out 5 to 7 days very accurately. And so we use that to plan our schedule. But during the summer in Eastern Oregon, a lot of times when it's very hot, we get thunderstorms, and those are can be difficult for the meteorologist to forecast. So here in my hand, we actually have some hay that did get rained on in the windrow. And typically what we see with hay that gets rained on is we see bleaching, so there's going to be more yellow. Also, it's more difficult to keep the leaves in the hay, because after they get wet, after having dried down a little bit, then they kind of rehydrate, and then when it actually dries out enough again for us to bale, those leaves they're a lot more brittle than hay like this that didn't get rained on. And so a lot of times there isn't going to be as much leaf, and then if there is leaf, it's going to be a little more shattered. Another concern is that the nutrients in the hay do leach out with the rain. So typically we see some of the protein decrease, the digestibility typically decreases as well, and then a lot of those macronutrients, your calcium, your phosphorus, potassium, those kind of things also are washed out with the rain. The one benefit to rain, if you have a horse that needs low sugar hay, it also does wash out some of the sugars, and not so much in the alfalfa, but a lot of times in grass hay that gets rained on is going to be considerably lower in sugar. And some of you might be familiar with this, as it's actually recommended for hay that is high in sugar to be placed in a bucket to wash some of those sugars out before you feed your horse if you can't get low sugar hay. And a couple of other quality factors that occur because of rain is that the hay lays out in the field longer, and so the next hay that we take off typically is going to have a lot more variation in the growth, the plant's growth cycle, because the hay that was under the row is going to be less mature than the hay that was in between the rows, and so we're going to have a harder time keeping all the hay at a uniform growth stage. And then the other difficulty is the rain actually kind of pushes this hay down into the ground, and so we have a hard time picking it up with the rakes and the balers, and so sometimes there will be hay left in the field, and then when we go to harvest the next crop, we weren't able to pick it up the first time, but it never fails that the second time it will get picked up, and then we have this old rained on hay that's been laying there. You have small pieces of it in with your nice new cut hay. And so the rain in Oregon and anywhere that people are trying to produce hay, it's one of our largest struggles, and it's something that we unfortunately can't control. We just do the best we can with the information that we're provided. And then we just hope for the best.
In Oregon, I believe besides the rain, there are other issues that you have to consider when you are producing your hay. And I think one universal one will be the weeds, and
yes.
Horse people are worried about the toxic plants or like foxtail contamination into the hay. And how do you manage to do that and take care of the weed issues?
Yes, so weeds are an issue for all farmers, but even more so for farmers who are producing forage, because livestock typically don't respond well to weeds, even if they aren't toxic. And then especially to horses, there are quite a few weeds out there that actually are toxic and can be quite harmful for them. So we spray all of our fields only once a year, but we put on a dormant application of a herbicide, and we mix that herbicide up every couple of years so that we don't get resistance. There are different herbicides that have different modes of action, is what we like to say, within the plant, which basically means that it targets different parts of the plant, and we mix those up every so every couple years so that we don't get any resistance. And we also a lot of times have to combine herbicides as well, because we have some herbicides that will target broadleaves, like maybe a tansy or a Canadian thistle. And then we also have some grasses like witchgrass or cheatgrass or foxtail that we need to be, you know, keeping out of our fields as well. And so a lot of times we have a herbicide that we have to take 2 herbicides, one that will kill the grass that we don't want, and one that will take out the broadleaves. One thing that we do here that isn't done everywhere, but some farmers do, is we try to make all of our applications done while the plant is not growing. For a couple of reasons, mostly because it doesn't harm the crop. If the crop is hibernating, you know, it's a lot easier on the crop, but also we do that as well just because typically when during the winter or whenever things aren't growing, there aren't as many weeds out there. And so if we can prevent the weeds from germinating in the first place, you know, that really helps us stay on top of them as opposed to, you know, spraying them once they've actually sprouted. There's one thing also that we've added to our farm this year. We have some fields that have been certified as noxious weed free by the state of Oregon. And so we have the state of Oregon come out and inspect our fields, and they look for noxious weeds. Now, noxious weed is a weed that is considered invasive and not native. So just because we are certified weed free, that actually means that we're certified noxious weed free. That doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't weeds that the state does not consider noxious in our fields. However, with our herbicide practices, we typically keep our fields very clean. If we have a spot along the outside or something that might have some weeds in it, cheatgrass is especially hard for us to control. We typically big bale that so that it's kept completely separate from the hay that we're selling as retail. But weeds are a problem anywhere you go, and you definitely have to work hard and do a lot of forward planning in order to keep your fields clean. Our most challenging crop to grow from a weed management perspective is actually our Timothy alfalfa, and the reason for that is that most of the herbicides that can keep weeds out of Timothy, broadleaves out of Timothy, are going to kill the alfalfa, and then most of the herbicides that would keep cheatgrass or foxtail or something like that out of a grass are hard on the Timothy, and so we have a really hard time managing our Timothy alfalfa just because there aren't a lot of herbicides that work for both alfalfa and Timothy. Orchard is a more hardy grass, and we don't have a problem there. There are herbicides we can apply in the dormant season that don't hurt the orchard grass at all, but the Timothy is challenging. And that's something that we're still working on, trying to figure out the right herbicide mix to be able to, you know, do a good job of managing weeds in our Timothy alfalfa rotation.
Awesome. We've already talked about the bleaching of the rain and toxic weeds or some pests that we don't like to see in the hay. And besides looking at the stem and leaf ratio, the beautiful color, we have to do forage analysis to make sure that we know what exactly is in the hay and how do we calculate those nutrients. So Daniel, when do you sample your hay, and what is included in the hay analysis? And do you offer the general public a copy of it so they can know what they're feeding? Yeah,
that's a great question. So we do provide analysis to anyone who wants to buy our hay. We like to give as much information as possible to our customers. Typically, we test our hay within a week after harvesting it. It's important to note that when farmers are taking nutrient analysis of their hay, they should always be doing that after the hay has been baled, because a lot can change from the windrow to actually getting in the bale. We send most of our retail hay, we send to a laboratory in Idaho. It's called High Desert Dairy, and we have them perform a equine analysis. High Desert Dairy is part of the Rock River laboratory. They're a group that performs forage analysis, silage and hay across the country, and is used by a lot of equine nutritionists on the East Coast. That's actually how we got in contact with them, is from one of our East Coast buyers. Now, when we are sampling our hay, if we take that stack behind us, we would go and we have a 20-inch probe that we press into the bale so that we can get into the bale. We usually go right in the middle of it, and we need to fill a half-gallon Ziploc bag, and so we basically probe until that's full. I mean, and it depends kind of a lot on the hay as to how many probes we have to take. I would say it's between 15 and 30. On our hay that it has a little more stem and a little bit less leaf, a lot of times we can fill that bag up with more like 20, because we can actually get the probe to go into the bale and the hay to actually go into the probe, the full length of the probe. With some of our really high testing, really leafy hay, those leaves actually press together in our probe, so we can't take a full probe as easily, and so that sometimes is 30 or 40 probes in a stack. And so we'll do that, and we just kind of randomly go around the stack probing. That way, we can kind of get a general representation of the field. We don't just take it from this part of the stack here. We like to have an idea spread across the entire field of, just a real a good broad understanding of what the hay is going to be like. When we send our tests off to Rock River, we test for the big things: the crude protein, the fiber, the RFV, the TDN, but we also have a panel of 13 nutrients, macro and micronutrients, that we test for as well. So potassium, calcium, phosphorus, magnesium, zinc, and a whole slew of others. And then we also have a breakdown on the fibers and also the carbohydrates. We don't do that for our dairy hay. For cow customers, we exclude that carbohydrate test, but for all of our equine retail hay, we make sure that we have the water-soluble carbohydrates, the starches, and also the non-soluble carbohydrates. And then from that we can determine what the overall sugar content of the hay is. And so yeah, if you buy hay from us and you want a copy of the analysis, we can email that to you, and you can look it over for yourself to see what it looks like, and just get a firm idea of what the nutritional quality of the hay is going to be.